Hi, good morning. My name is Jennifer Chang, and I'm with the North Star Fund.
And I'm Kevin Ryan with the New York Foundation.
So we are so excited to have you all with us here today. I have the esteemed role of making a lot of administrative announcements, so I really appreciate y'all listening. The first is if you have any accessibility needs or questions, please talk to the folks at the registration desk and the wellness station, which is right where you all came in. So, and folks will be there all day, and we'd really love to hear from you for anything that you might need. So good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. So on behalf of the North Star Fund, I'm so excited to welcome you all here today to Resilient New York. We are so thrilled to be hosting this event with so many wonderful partners and co-sponsors. Again, my name is Jennifer Chang, and I'm the Executive Director of the North Star Fund. And for those of you who don't know about North Star, we are a community foundation with the sole mission of supporting grassroots organizing in the 5 boroughs and the Hudson Valley. Our grant making is completely led by community activists, and the funds that we distribute and the programs that we run are all based on funds and support raised by donors like you. So we're really your fund. This is your event, and we're so excited to be here with you today. When we came together to think about this event, we were looking for a way to bring grassroots organizers, community members, donors, funders, institutions together to have real hard and honest conversation about what we can be doing right now to have a unified, proactive agenda led by community members, led and developing community leadership in a way that can make sustained social change here in New York, but that can also inform and lead our national and global resistance. We are, to paraphrase William Barber, we are fighting for the future and the soul of our city and our nation and the world, and we really look to all of you today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being willing to share your expertise. Thank you for listening to each other, and thank you for making the commitment to make not just end at the close and when we have our reception and our hugs, but to really make meaningful connections that will endure and that will hold folks like us at the North Star Fund accountable to change the way that we do our work so that we can better support the grassroots. So I want to give special thanks today to our partners who are all here and include the Brooklyn Community Foundation, Cricket Island Foundation, the New York Foundation, New York Women's Foundation, the Overbrook Foundation, the Resource Generation NYC chapter, the Sherman Foundation, and Solidaire. And I also want to thank our many extraordinary, but far too many to name, co-sponsors. They're listed in your materials. I also want to thank our incredible North Star Fund staff for putting this event together. Trust me, from pencils to insurance, it's more work than one could ever imagine. And a special thanks to Zaida Pirani, who is the co-chair of the North Star Fund Community Funding Committee and the coordinator of our program today. So thank you.
So I have the pleasure and the privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Opal Tometi. So, as you all know, she's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. She's executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And I could go on with the usual stuff, but when I thought about Opal, I thought, when I think of Opal, what do I think of? And here's some of the words that I just think of. Someone who's a connector, someone who's a relationship builder, someone who's a brilliant strategist, a great listener, a mentor to so many folks in the room, including me, and someone who is a part of a growing number of local and national leaders who are playing the social justice movement forward. So with that, you don't need to hear from me. Let's hear from Opal. All right.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction, and your words are really meaningful to me, Kevin. So thank you for having me this morning. And it's just a pleasure to be among so many people that I adore and I love and respect and get to work with and get to roll with every single day. So it's just a privilege to be able to share amongst peers. Some of you might recognize the image on the screen. The fellow on the screen, his name is David Felix, or Felix David as described by the police and the media. Neither cared to get his name right. His body laid in the morgue for nearly 21 days before it was claimed by his parents, who had to come to the United States from Haiti to identify their son's body. To them and those who knew him, he was vibrant, a vivacious soul, and although they looked at him that fateful day with his bullet-wounded body, David was not what they had described in the media. He was 24 years old and an aspiring fashion student. He was a Black immigrant, originally from Haiti, with a love of history. According to his friends and family, from what you can see in this picture, he was handsome. He could dance salsa, bachata, cha-cha, merengue, and he eagerly offered unsolicited fashion advice to anybody who would hear him. Since his arrival in New York City in 2007 at age 16, David forged another family with runaways and other homeless youth across the city. When his own younger brothers arrived in the United States from Haiti, David cared for them as though he was their father. Now, as a Black immigrant in the United States, David suffered the consequences of both anti-Black racism and unjust immigration laws. He'd previously been arrested for a few minor drug charges. And what many people don't realize is that when you're arrested for a minor drug possession, you could possibly be deported. He was turned over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and placed in deportation proceedings. He spent nearly 2 years in an immigration detention facility in Florida, and it was a private prison, to be exact. When he was released, his prior record and incarceration limited his opportunities for employment and supportive housing. So David struggled through the shelter system, and he struggled to gain access from other social services from multiple youth programs. Finally, in the fall of 2014, David was granted housing at the Bridge. On the afternoon that they ended our brother David's life, 2 veteran detectives of the 26th precinct were searching for David because, according to them, he was a suspect of an alleged purse snatching. They showed up at the Bridge, buzzed the front door, which, due to the time of day, had only 1 staff person on duty. The young woman that the detectives met at the building, which housed homeless folks with mental health issues, shared with them that David was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The detectives told the staff member that they wanted to enter the building at all costs. They showed her a piece of paper with David's picture on it, and they forced their way in. They wouldn't wait for her to call a supervisor when she asked. They barged in despite the protests and headed up the 6th floor while demanding that she use her master key and unlock the building. When they got in there, the detectives found David Felix in his unit. He tried to run. He was afraid. He had had several encounters with law enforcement, with ICE officials, and others who had abused him over the years. According to the detectives, when they entered the building, he escaped through the fire escape, but they managed to catch up with him. They said he was, quote unquote, aggressive and assaulted the officers with their walkie-talkies. If my memory serves me correctly, they actually ended up shooting David in the back. David's death at the hands of these 2 veteran police officers would be his last incident in a long history of being criminalized simply for being who he was. The United States model of criminalization has expanded to such an extent in this country that it touched every aspect of David's life. As a Black immigrant that also suffered with homelessness and mental health issues, David experienced constant violence in the forms of poverty, xenophobia, criminalization of homelessness, and mental health issues, in addition to anti-Black racism at the systemic level. And this is the story of our brother, David Felix. And Baji got to know him, sadly, only through his passing, while we began supporting his family and others that he loved. They were on their quest to find out answers and on a quest to restore the dignity of David's name. And we heard about him because we were working closely with our comrades over at Streetwise and Safe, an incredible local organization that works with queer and trans youth. And then we also were working with Million Hoodies. Dante Berry was the first one to give us a call about David. Through our work with David and his family, we learned many, many things. The system was rigged. It was up against him and the family. As I shared, his family had to come in from Haiti in order to retrieve his body. They were surprised at what they witnessed in the US. They expected the mayor to actually show up at the funeral. They didn't think that this type of thing happened in the United States, but it does. They spoke and they speak Haitian Creole, and so the services they needed to have translated. We worked with the family and got translation from members that we know. We also worked with Families for Freedom and others at Flatbush Tenant Association to translate the program and the materials to ensure that the materials were available in English, Spanish, and Creole. And then Black Lives Matter New York City chapter donated money for the services and donated money to the family so that they could help care for his ailing mother. This is but one story, right? As many of us know, this is one story. We're hearing so many stories like this in our community. But it's an important one for us. And we do this work to honor the life of David Felix, but also to ensure that no one else has to suffer this type of degradation and this type of fate. David Felix was a son, he was a big brother, he was a vivacious spirit, a friend, a fashionista, a human. He lived in Brooklyn, he was a Black immigrant, and David's life mattered. And it matters today. And that's why we do this work. And I said, he's from Brooklyn, and I want to make some connections around Brooklyn because that's where I reside. And where many of us in the room obviously reside, the Republic of Brooklyn. And many people don't know that Brooklyn is actually the Black immigrant capital of the world. Oh, sorry, the US. I kid. And New York City is actually home to the largest Black immigrant community in the entire United States. And you can probably tell by the various parades, the festivals, the great food, and from as far as the Bronx to Brooklyn, you're going to see our culture infused to the very fabric of New York City. And I hope that you all will be out there enjoying all summer long with all the various parties and events that Black immigrant communities are going to be hosting. Many people don't know some of the information that I want to share with you about Black immigrants, and I think it's important because you all are in the Black immigrant capital of the US. And we're living in a time where facts seem to be disputed every single day and alternative facts are being spewed. And I think it's important for us to bring some truth today. Now, there are nearly 1 million Black immigrants right here in New York City, and Black immigrants are nearly 30% of the entire Black population in New York. When you include the legacy generation, or i.e. I call it the first generation, or folks like myself who are the bridge generation, this means we're over 50% of the Black community in New York. And we're all impacted by migration in one way or another. We have blended families. And when you take into account more of a multi-generational lens and take it back a generation or forward a generation, this actually looks more like 70% of the Black community in New York City has some sort of migrant root or story. The reality is that especially since 9/11, the impact of the changing immigration system, biometric data collection, and more has led to an increasing criminalization of Black immigrants. They are being kept, stashed away in detention facilities, deported behind closed doors, and their stories are oftentimes not heard. So I had some statistics here on the screen. You'll see on this next slide, 1 in 5 Black immigrants who are in detention are there and going to be deported. Black immigrants also suffer the highest unemployment rates of all immigrants and the lowest income rates. Similar to the African American experience, education is not the great equalizer. And there are so many stories, there are so many experiences, and despite the fact that we live in New York, and despite the fact that there's such a large presence here, their stories are still rendered invisible. And this is why the Black Alliance for Just Immigration exists. We are the first national organization that works explicitly with Black people at the intersection of immigration and race. And for those of you who are familiar with us, our mission is to organize, to advocate, and raise awareness around issues that face Black immigrants and African Americans. We celebrated our 11th anniversary just last month, and although we weren't based in New York originally, we chose New York for our headquarters 5 years ago because we knew the importance of organizing exactly where our people are. And if Black immigrant quality of life can be so low and the outcomes in the immigration system so abysmal in a place like New York, with all of our presence, with all of our contributions, then we had to build the power to transform these conditions. Now, these 11 years have taught us quite a lot. It's been a journey. Because when people hear the word immigrant, they typically don't think of us. They typically don't think non-Black Latino. And when they hear the words Black and immigrant in the same sentence, it usually is antagonistic with its framing, and people are hearing it in reference to stealing jobs. And what we think is that this really needs a reframe, right? A reframe that accounts for the ways in which capitalism and white supremacy always pit our communities against one another. And if we wanted to get into the truth about the matter about jobs, we'd have to examine the ways in which unions are being attacked. We'd have to examine the ways in which education system is substandard, where skills around technology are being missed in our communities, where our schools are being funded by our property values. We'd have to get into questions about discrimination in the workplace, how you might not get a second interview based on your resume and what your name is, how it sounds, right? And then discrimination in the workplace, period. Dismissal of your contributions there. The reality is that anti-Black racism is pervasive, and we can't be silent about it because it's impacting every sphere of our lives. And the same reason I started working with Baji 7 years ago is the same reason I co-created Black Lives Matter 4 years ago. The appalling silence about racism and anti-Blackness and the false concept of colorblindness, which was aimed to silence us. However, just like our forebears taught us, there is power in truth-telling. And both articulating and creating cultural awareness, but also organizing and building political power is key. And I share this information about Black immigrants being criminalized because it's the evidence of why we're in this particular moment. We need to be moving conversations forward. Conversations need to be moved from personal responsibility to and even conversations around interpersonal dynamics of racism, but to the structural. We need to talk about the role of state-sanctioned violence in our lives and the biases that they continue to enshrine in our very fabric of our communities. Now, we've been doing work at the local level, organizing and working with families and ensuring that families were reunited and fighting deportation cases. But we also engage in other strategies that look at bringing Black communities together and building solidarity amongst ourselves. We organize what is called the Black Immigration Network at the local level. It's similar to a model that we have at the national network level. And it's essentially Black-led groups and organizations in New York City. There are about 30 of them, various groups from African immigrant-led organizations, Caribbean, groups from across the Americas that are represented, and dozens of other individuals. We've engaged in a number of different types of activities over the years. I remember one of our most exciting activities as a group was back in 2013, where we mobilized over 500 Black immigrants to Washington, D.C. to champion immigrant justice. It was the first time that had ever happened, and in partnership with Churches United to Save and Heal, the Black Institute, labor unions, and so on, and we were able to mobilize that really amazing assortment of people and leaders. Fast forward to today, we're working with groups like Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees, fighting for the redesignation of TPS, Temporary Protected Status, for Haitians. We're working with this particular organization because we think it's important, we believe it's important to uplift the voices of women, to uplift the voices of Haitians who so frequently get the short end of the stick and who are so systematically disenfranchised in our immigration system. And we believe that organizations like Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees, who organize at the intersection of race, of gender, and immigration, and are also on the front line, deserve our support. Without networks like the Black Immigration Network, organizations like Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees would not get the support and resources and amplification of their voices that they need and deserve. They are faced right now with acute challenges, both in the community and organizationally, but the Black Immigration Network was able to come together and fundraise and support their work at the local level. We practice what we call transformational solidarity, knowing that our communities that are most acutely impacted by both global systems and local policies must be protected and supported even more. Because if they and the organizations that support them are left to crumble, then all of us suffer. And this undermines us as a whole. And I have an image of Ninaj up there on the screen, who's the leader of Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees. I believe that we need a transformational solidarity. It's a term that I coined a few years ago, because I do that now apparently, coin terms. It's a conceptual framework, essentially. And I first shared about it in a webinar that Baji created to demonstrate why the immigrant rights movement must show up for Black Lives Matter. And the lesson here still stands. And the principle in this webinar that we shared was quite simple, and it's solidarity that recognizes that our destinies are intertwined, and that when we lift those who are most marginalized, all of us will benefit. And we found that addressing anti-Blackness is a foundation for transformational solidarity. It's all of our movement's Achilles heel. Being in the immigrant rights space, I've heard a lot of transactional talk with questions like, when will Black people show up for immigrants? This kind of framework isn't working. And we need nuance, we need sophistication, and we need to acknowledge the fact that people can be both Black and immigrant. People can be Black immigrant and queer and trans and a number of intersections. We live all of these lives, right? And we need frameworks that are inclusive of all affected people. And we need frameworks that inspire us to show up consistently. We must do this while making a commitment to divest from all oppression as it impacts all of our lives. And we have an opportunity to build off the rich history of Black immigrant forebears. I'm gonna show some folks on the screen that I love. So we got Shirley Chisholm here, got Marcus Garvey, Audre Lorde. So many folks don't realize that these folks were Black immigrants or had Black immigrant roots, and they were part of that bridge generation. And I look here at our sister Audre Lorde, who said there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And this is so true and is so pertinent right now. And it's why we see our organizing efforts evolving all across the country. I want to share about a little bit of an effort that we're working on right now. We've partnered with a dozen or so organizations at the local level and dozens more at the national level on an emergent framework we're calling #Freedom Cities. And it's akin to a movement, and we're beginning to engage in strategies, political and cultural interventions that, when threaded together, create safe, healthy, thriving neighborhoods and local communities. We believe in local grassroots leadership and action that will lead us to freedom. We believe in creating the world we want to see right now in rural places, in suburbs, in towns, and anywhere that Black and brown people reside. The vision, which was the dream of our ancestors, drives our current multiracial, multifaceted movement committed to protecting the most vulnerable amongst us while demanding freedom for all of us. We believe that our people already have the wisdom they need to thrive. And in many places around the US and around the world, the beloved community is already underway. We know that figuring out what works takes a lot of courage, creativity, dedication, and reallocation of resources. And we want to share and collaborate on what is working in many different ways and across our cities and towns and communities to ensure that we can all thrive. Like I said, it's emergent, and I hope that many of you will be joining us over the coming months and years as we build this out. We believe that we have to dream and build on our own terms. We shouldn't be forced to hide in confined spaces. We deserve to be free. Ultimately, we believe that there are no shortcuts to democracy. We have to commit to grassroots organizing. We have to. There's no other way. We have to create the cities, spaces that reflect our aspirations and our values, where you're not shot in the back in your own residence, or where you're not left to die in the cell like our sister Tiombe Carlos, nor should you have to languish in jails because you don't have money for bail. Beloved, another world is happening. Just this past weekend, we were able to work with our comrades across the movement for Black Lives to help release Black immigrant mothers from Rikers. It was an incredible experience for all of us, everybody who was involved. And we know that it's necessary to engage in these types of actions directly. One of our sisters who was there and that we helped to bail out was a survivor of sex trafficking. And we were happy to support her through this exceptionally difficult case, but also to affirm her identity and let her know that although she's being doubly victimized, we are standing with her. And we're not going to only stand there as we released her, or as we supported her release with the bail, but we're going to be walking with her now that she's out. Y'all, democracy is a lifestyle, right? It exists in our daily commitments. It exists in the context of our communities and our institutions. And a real democracy is possible because another world must be. The world that we have right now with that president is not worthy of us. It's not. It's not serving us. And it's not just DC. And this isn't a partisan critique, right? This is human rights. It's a basic human rights critique. but it's not worthy of us. From the healthcare to trans-antagonistic laws, to anti-immigrant provisions, to the ramping up of the failed, quote-unquote, war on drugs, to threats of war, to defunding women's health and reproductive services, to the criminalization of dissent. I could go on. I could really go on. This is an affront to our collective humanity. And it's an attempt to silence our movements. But we, as people of conscience, are the majority. We have the last say. We get to say how this goes down. But we have to build the power. And we have to also recognize that this president that we have is not the producer of this piss-poor culture that we're living in, where xenophobia is rampant, where you see people in certain cities and towns carrying torches and assembling themselves as if, they're just missing their hoods, right? I don't know if y'all saw that. But he is not the creator of that. He is the product of it all. We have to get honest about that. And we have to organize to shift our cultural landscape, to organize to shift our political landscape. And we have to engage in strategies that don't undermine one another's community. And as I begin to close, I want to give love to the organizers in the room. If you're an organizer, can you just stand up? If you've organized now, if you've organized in the past, if you plan on organizing, will you please, I hope you plan on organizing. Please stand up. Give everybody a round of applause. So many of us. So many of us. Y'all, you were going to be the ones who save us, who inspire and engage in strategies to transform our world. And I thank you for the tireless work and sometimes the thankless work that you all do. I have so much love and respect for you. And if people don't thank you enough, please know that I'm thanking you. And I hope that as we go throughout the day, that we'll show extra love and appreciation for one another, because we are living in a very rough time. And I know so many of us are struggling with doubt, with other types of challenges, economic, health, and so on. And we just need to love on each other while we can and give praise where it's due. And it's due to you all, right? And I'll close by just saying this, that we should be moving with the Ubuntu philosophy. It's a Southern African principle, and I'm sure you all have heard it, but I am because you are, right? And you are because I am. It's a humble and righteous way of living, and it recognizes the fact that we're in this together, and we're not getting out of it without one another. And we're much stronger when we recognize that and when we engage in strategies that uplift the most marginalized amongst us. So thank you so much for your time this morning. I look forward to the panel and to hanging out with y'all for a little bit longer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Opal, for those extraordinary words and for helping us to set the framework for the rest of today around really building transformational solidarity and really, really putting those words into practice. So I'm so pleased to be with our morning plenary speakers. And I have a great chance to, quote unquote, moderate, but let me tell you, these folks do not need any moderation. So I'm just gonna sit back like you and enjoy the conversation. I wanted to just make a short introduction. Our panelists are going to provide you with some opening statements, and we're going to do our best to make time. I know that we started a little bit late. We're going to do our best to make time for audience Q&A as well, and so I'll let you all know. And I also wanted to take a moment and welcome all of our viewers on live stream. I realized I neglected to do so when we made our introductions. So basically, hi, Mom. I did cut my hair before today. Thank you. All right, so we've got some great folks up here with us today. Fahd Ahmed, who's the Executive Director of Daisy's Rising Up and Moving. Biane Garcia, an organizer with Make the Road New York. And she's joined by Cristobal Guerra, who is with Caracal Interpreters Cooperative. Monifa Bandele, who is the VP of Moms Rising and Steering Committee member of Communities United for Police Reform. And Maggie Williams, the co-director of the Advocacy Institute. So let me just ask us to give a round of applause for our wonderful speakers. Cristobal, do you want to say a few words about interpretation today?
Yeah, I'm here working with Caracol Interpreters Cooperative. I will be interpreting from Spanish to English for Biane as she speaks. It will be a consecutive interpreting, so she will speak first, and then I will interpret right after.
Great, thank you. Great, so we're going to start with Fahd. Fahd, thank you for being with us today. And I was wondering if you could open our panel by talking to us about how DRUM has been responding to the increased criminalization and government-supported hate of Muslim and South Asian communities, and how can our funders in the room better support developing organizing strategies that enable groups like DRUM to reach out beyond your base communities?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. My name is Fahad. I work with DRUM, Daisy's Rising Up and Moving, and we organize low-income and working-class South Asian immigrant workers and youth. And so our base of folks are the street vendors, the cab drivers that you see in the city, people working in restaurants, people doing domestic work, and the children or young people of those same households. For us, I think there's been a couple of thoughts that have been emerging post-election. The first is realizing that in this period, trying to move affirmative policies is not going to be very likely. We're not going to be passing legislations on the federal level that are going to improve immigrant rights, that are going to improve law enforcement accountability, that are going to improve worker rights, that are going to expand our educational system towards in a better direction. If anything, we will be trying to fight to hold the ground and try to fight off bad policies. But in that same context, our communities continue to be at risk, not only from bad policies, but actual physical danger. And so a lot of our work has really been around building capacity on the local level, on the neighborhood level, around how are we going to protect ourselves. And we've been building out a strategy called hate-free zones to build relationships within our communities, across our communities, and build the capacity of people to be able to defend themselves. And I think in one of the breakout groups, one of our organizers will be presenting a little bit more on that. In addition to that, I think we've also been thinking around that we do need to be thinking something around policies on the federal level and on the state level and on the local level. Immediately, through the election campaign, we heard these references to Muslim registries that the current administration was at that time propagating that they would do a registration of all Muslims. The interesting fact for us was that there actually had already been a Muslim registry undertaken by the Bush administration that continued all the way into the Obama administration and was temporarily halted in 2011. It was the NSEERS program, which forced men above the ages of 16 from 25 Muslim countries and from North Korea to add the diversity factor to register with the government. 83,000 men registered, 13,000 of those men were put into deportation proceedings. We worked with about 200 to 300 of those families. As immediately after the election, in 2011, the Obama administration had halted that program, but we had been engaged in conversations with the administration and pushed back to say that the regulations that allowed the program to exist were still on the books. And they're like, no, like, don't worry about it. Like, how would this ever become active again if we're deactivating it? And so immediately after the election, we were able to say that this is actually now going to be reactivated. We were able to re-engage many of our members who had survived that program, and actually even some of our members who were deported as a result of that program, through talking to media, through talking to policymakers. We launched a campaign with MoveOn.org. That same petition was then taken up by Moms Rising and several other online groups, and we collected, I think, 350,000 petitions or more. We met with the White House under the Obama administration directly, met with Secretary Jay Johnson, and through that, we were able to push and bring stories about what had happened, that our government told men, by the fact of what countries they were from, to line up outside of federal buildings across the country. And every day for a period of 2 years, there were men that were lined up outside of federal buildings because of the country that they were from, to stand in line to register with the government. And then many of those men were then humiliated and then eventually put into deportation proceedings. As a result of that advocacy and organizing, the Obama administration undid the regulations, and so the program was completely taken away. And so if the current administration wants to restart that program, they have to start from scratch and go through the regulatory process, as opposed to just having a light switch that they come in and they're able to turn back on. I think the lesson I want to highlight from that is really one around how do we orient ourselves in this current political moment. And the framings that we've been using have been to cede no ground. When we're dealing with an administration that are proto-fascist, there's really no room for compromise or negotiation or like, we'll give you this if you give us that. We have to stand our ground and give no inch. We have to fight them tooth and nail every inch of the way. And then that applies on the local level as well. The local administration was very quick to try to say that New York City is a sanctuary city, while we practice broken windows policing that impacts not only immigrant communities, but also Black communities, Latino communities, poor communities, queer folks, people in public housing, and then the people that are at the intersections of all of those identities as well. What does it mean to call it a sanctuary city when our schools are underfunded, when one of our youth are going to high schools where they're using history books from 2000, but we spent $400 million to put police and metal detectors inside of our schools? What does it mean to call it a sanctuary city when public housing is deteriorating and falling apart, and the solution is to privatize and sell it off to developers? So again, even on the local level, with so-called progressive administrations, we have to be clear that we're going to fight every inch of the way, and we're going to hold you to what you claim to be, and we're going to push beyond the bounds of what's being drawn up. And I think the last point, or in sort of how do we tie a lot of this together, is for us, we've also been using the terms transactional and transformational solidarity that Opal presented. And I think around transformational solidarity, the main point that we've really been thinking around is who it is that we're building that solidarity across. I think it's one thing for me to be able to sit on this panel and be able to talk with Monifa and say, like, okay, we're building solidarity. But is that solidarity really being built in our communities? Are restaurant workers in Jackson Heights going to step up if a queer or trans person feels under attack and be like, all right, I'm going to protect your back? Are street vendors in our neighborhood going to stand up when other street vendors are being attacked by the police? And it's really on that level that we really need to build that solidarity across our communities, and that goes to the day-to-day hard work of grassroots organizing. And it's that work that really needs to be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Fad. Biane,
wanted to ask you, how has Make the Roads LGBTQ immigrant organizing work shifted post-election, and what new strategies or campaigns are you developing with your base?
Voy a hablar en español.
I'm going to be speaking in Spanish.
Y Javier,
Cristóbal.
Cristóbal, sorry, me va a ayudar a traducir.
And Cristóbal is going to help me translate, interpret.
So let's start with a chant. When I say trans, you say power. Trans, power. Trans, power. Thank you. Gracias a todos por estar aquí y principalmente a los que me invitaron a este evento. Para mí es un honor estar aquí representando a mi comunidad trans.
Thank you so much for being here, especially folks that invited me to this event. For me, it's an honor to be here representing my trans community, to be here.
¿Qué hemos hecho como Se Hace Camino en Nueva York? Específicamente como el proyecto LGBT, TRIP, que es the Trans Immigrant Project.
What have we done as an organization as Make the Road New York? I want to talk specifically about TRIP, the Trans Immigrant Project.
Después de la elección del presidente Donald Trump,
after Donald Trump's election,
hemos escuchado que un 36% han incrementado a un 36% los crímenes de odio hacia personas de color.
We've heard that there's been an increment in over 36% of hate crimes against people, trans people of color.
El año pasado, nosotros como Se Hace Camino hicimos un conteo total de 15 crímenes hacia mujeres trans, solo en Queens.
In Make the Road last year, we made a count of about 15 hate crimes against trans women only in Queens.
Este año llevamos 4 crímenes registrados.
This year we have about 4 crimes registered.
En este año, de lo que llevamos de año, 11 mujeres trans han sido asesinadas en manos de la violencia.
In this year, just a little bit that we have of this year, 11 women have been murdered.
Una recientemente falleció en Chelsea hace 2 semanas.
One recently passed away in Chelsea about 2 weeks ago.
Voy a contarles un poquito de mi historia, por qué empecé a organizar a mi comunidad.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and why I started organizing in my community.
Cuando llegué a los Estados Unidos como una persona indocumentada,
when I came to the U.S. as an undocumented person,
nunca pensé convertirme en una organizadora y organizar a mi comunidad.
I never thought I would become an organizer organizing in my community.
Cuando venía de México pensaba que Estados Unidos o específicamente New York.
When I came from Mexico, I wasn't thinking that would happen in the U.S. or even New York.
Era una ciudad que me iba a sentir segura.
I thought that it was going to be a city that I was going to feel safe.
Pero cuando hice mi transición hacia mujer transgénero,
but when I transitioned as a transgender woman,
me encontré con muchas barreras, como la discriminación en el empleo, la discriminación en la vivienda, los ataques hacia nosotras.
I encountered a lot of barriers like employment discrimination, housing discrimination, attacks against me and my kind and my community,
y las deportaciones.
And deportations.
Esas son mis principales campañas que tengo ahora en Se Hace Camino en Nueva York.
Right now, the principal campaigns that I have in Make the Road New York are about these issues.
Porque cuando tenía 19 años fui atacada por una persona transfóbica y homofóbica.
Because when I was 19 years old, I was attacked by a transphobic and homophobic person.
Y por esa razón estuve 18 meses en la prisión.
And for that reason, I spent 18 months in jail.
A punto de ser deportada a mi país de origen.
About to be deported to my country of origin.
Sabiendo que yo a mis 14 años vi cómo a mi amiga trans la asesinaron 3 personas.
Knowing how when I was 14 years old, I saw my trans friend be murdered by 3 people.
Y esa fue la razón por la cual yo llegué a este país.
And that was the reason why I came to this country.
Me enfrenté a muchas barreras como mujer trans.
I faced a lot of barriers as a trans woman.
Pero esas barreras,
but those barriers,
las convertí en lucha.
I turned them into a fight.
El 36% de mujeres trans
36% of trans women
son discriminadas en el empleo.
are discriminated against in employment.
Un 76% de mujeres trans no cuenta con un empleo.
76% of trans women can't count with employment opportunities.
El 43% de mujeres trans no cuentan con una vivienda digna.
43% of trans women can't find decent housing.
Y el otro por ciento tienen una vivienda, pero están viviendo acoso todos los días.
And the other percent do have housing, but are living under attacks every day.
Los ataques en la calle hacia las mujeres trans por el simple hecho de ser mujer trans
Attacks on the street against trans women are made just for the simple fact of being a trans woman.
es terrible.
It's horrible.
Miles de personas trans o LGBT están en centros de detención en estos momentos.
Thousands of trans folks and people that identify as LGBTQ are in detention centers right now.
Y hay bancos y corporaciones que están apoyando eso.
And there are banks and corporations that are supporting that.
Lo que se hace Camino Nueva York está haciendo es igual al trabajo que Trump está haciendo, organizando a la comunidad para que aprendan sobre sus derechos, de cómo defenderse de un atacante.
What Make the Road is doing is very similar to the kind of work that Trump is doing, teaching the community to learn about their rights so that they can defend themselves against these attacks.
Estos ataques crecieron después de las elecciones, cuando el presidente Donald Trump empezó con su mensaje de odio hacia las personas indocumentadas, personas musulmanas, mujeres, hacia las mujeres, a la comunidad trans también.
These attacks have gotten worse after Donald Trump's election, and his hate speech against Muslim communities, women, and even trans women and LGBTQ folks.
Vamos a seguir organizando. De hecho, Se Hace Camino Nueva York hizo la primera marcha translatina en el 2012 con 50 personas que salimos a marchar por todo Roosevelt Avenue y 37 Avenida.
We're going to continue organizing. Actually, Make the Road New York was part of one of the first marches, LGBTQ marches that happened in Queens in 2012.
El año pasado llegamos casi a 300 personas que entraron y disfrutaron la marcha translatina.
And last year we had that Trans Latina march again, and we reached almost 300 people. The first time around it was about 50 folks.
Este año la marcha translatina está mandando un mensaje a que como personas trans o como personas de color no vamos a tolerar ningún tipo de actos violentos hacia la comunidad trans.
This year, the Trans Latina March is sending a clear message that as trans people and as trans people of color, we are not going to tolerate that hate.
Y va a ser el día julio 10 a las 4 de la tarde en Make the Road, Queens.
And it's going to take place July 10th at 4 p.m. and Make the Road, New York in Queens.
El trabajo va a seguir. Como todos se levantaron y son personas que están haciendo trabajo organizativo, al igual que yo, hay miles de personas allá afuera que necesitan del apoyo de ustedes.
The work will continue, and as you all stood up here and are doing organizing work, there are people like me out there that need the work that we're all doing.
¿Cómo puede ser posible que en el último ataque frente a McDonald's hacia dos mujeres trans, de las cuales una de ellas terminó con un pie roto,
How is it possible that the last attack in front of McDonald's against trans women, and one of them ended up with a broken foot?
cuando estaban siendo atacadas, habían miles de personas, cientos de personas viendo el ataque?
When they were being attacked, there were hundreds of people watching.
Habían muchos hombres
There were a lot of men,
y lo único que hacían es reírse,
and all they did was laugh,
sacar sus teléfonos
take out their phones,
y grabar.
and record.
Pero nadie más hizo nada.
But no one did anything.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Porque como comunidad latina no estamos entrenados a ayudar a la comunidad.
Why, as a Latino community, are we not trained to help our community?
O tal vez el machismo,
Is it machismo, maybe?
no lo sé.
I don't know.
Por eso es que estoy aquí enfrente de ustedes,
This is why I'm here in front of all of you,
and this is mi trabajo,
and this is my work,
llevar esta realidad hacia las personas que las escuchen.
to bring this reality to people so that they can hear.
Cientos de personas están falleciendo en manos de la violencia.
Hundreds of people are dying in the hands of violence.
10 aquí en Nueva York, en Estados Unidos.
And it's happening right here in the US.
Casi 300 personas, mujeres trans, en Brasil.
Almost 300 people, trans women.
76 mujeres en México. 76 en México.
And 76 in Mexico.
Y todas las personas que cometieron este crimen están sueltos.
And all the people that committed those crimes are free.
Ahorita puedo estar aquí enfrente de ustedes hablando,
Right now I'm here talking to you all,
pero no sé qué me puede pasar allá afuera.
but I don't know what would happen to me outside these doors.
And because the simple reason, because I'm a trans person. Esa es la única razón por la cual puedo ser atacada.
That's the only reason why I would be attacked.
Por eso les pido que se pongan de pie todos y que hagan un commitment.
That's why I want to ask you right now to stand up and
Que si
to,
van a estar conmigo en esta lucha.
and to make
Porque
a
las
commitment.
mujeres trans, la vida de las mujeres trans importan para mí e importan para ustedes.
To make a commitment for me to hear if you're going to be with me in this fight, because trans lives matter. Trans lives matter to me.
Ahora vamos a hacer este chant, que es muy importante para mí como una mujer trans.
And now we're going to do this chant, which is really important for me as a trans woman.
Trans life matter. Trans life matter. Trans life matter. Trans life matter. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. We're going to shift gears a little bit and turn to Maggie. We're hearing a lot about how many of our organizers and our organizations and communities have to invest a lot of resources right now in not ceding any ground to the horrific federal policies that seem to be unwound every minute, it feels. At the same time, right, many of us are in dialogue about what do we actually do to transform our local and state politics. And we live in a very special place. So from your perspective at the Advocacy Institute, what do you think it's going to take to transform the political landscape in New York for justice and dignity?
Good afternoon, everyone. Is my mic on? Is that good? Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me without the mic? No? Okay, sorry. It's worth a shot. It's worth a shot. It's just an honor to be up here with the panelists today. I've known Fahad for a long time and really respect the work of Drum, and thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing and also bringing your personal story to this conversation. We are shifting gears a little bit. At the Advocacy Institute, we are really an intermediary, somewhat similar to North Star Fund in that we support grassroots organizations that are really on the front lines. And we are in a special state. I think Fahad did a really great job of talking about the obstacles we face federally that we're all more than aware of, and then also some of the limitations of progressive government at the local level that isn't actually living up to all of the expectations, or actually it's talking the talk but not walking all of the walk. And what I want to actually focus on is the level of government between those two, which is our state. I think there are really three buckets that I want to hit on in terms of how we need to transform our state for justice and dignity. And it involves, and they're not the only three buckets, they're the three that I'm most familiar with. So it's really legislative wins, it's electoral wins, and it's changing funder strategies. And I'll start with the legislative component. New York, our governor is similar to our mayor in certain ways, although I would say our mayor is certainly more to the left of our governor. But our governor loves to preach progressive values or say he's going to take a stand for something, but then the details are not actually there, the action is not actually there. And instead of being at the forefront of the resistance, instead of New York State actually leading the way with a firm progressive agenda that refutes everything that Trump is doing, we are not doing that. We are often the last state to actually enact progressive reforms, which I find really unconscionable as as someone who's grown up in this state and wants to see this state actually live up to its potential for all New Yorkers and from all regions of the state, right? Like sometimes in New York City, we can get really focused on what New York City is doing, but the reality is that a lot of the communities we care about can't afford to live in New York City anymore and are moving to other parts of the state. And they need to be a part of this equation as well. So just to give a couple examples, I know this is a little bit of the choir here, but we were one of the last states to enact Raise the Age, which just passed in this year's budget. We were one of the last states to enact no-fault divorce, which has a huge impact on survivors of domestic violence. We still don't have a New York State DREAM Act. We still don't have comprehensive election reform or campaign finance reform. We still don't have AGENDA, which is Gender Identity Non-Discrimination Bill, so you can still discriminate against people for their gender identity in this state, and there's no penalty for that. So there are tons of pieces of legislation that would actually protect our communities that we can do at the state level, and we're not doing them. So that transitions to the electoral side. And I want to say that we're not doing them because groups aren't organized and because we're not trying, right? I mean, there are a lot of things we could talk about on the advocacy side about how do we build power more effectively, how do we have higher functioning coalitions, how are we even more strategic, how do we make sure that our coalitions are always accountable to people who are directly impacted, right? Like that's a whole set of conversations we can have. But the reality is we also need to change who's in office. And to give credit where credit is due, James Schaefer, who is my colleague and co-founder of the Advocacy Institute, has said this for a while, but if we want to actually transform the landscape in New York State, we need to actually take over the political landscape in New York State. We need more folks in this room to run for office. We need more women to run for office. And frankly, we can't tolerate what I'm going to use a little Albany insider jargon here, but we can't tolerate the Independent Democratic Conference anymore. And, you know, I don't think the Democrats are the key to justice. That's not what I'm saying. But the reality is that we actually could have a Democratic majority in the New York State Senate. We could have a majority, a Senate that is run by Democrats that at least has the potential to pass some of these progressive bills that I'm talking about, and some that I haven't even mentioned, right? Like the Assembly passes progressive legislation every day, comprehensive voting rights, the Liberty Act, right? We see this legislation. It's not like unattainable in New York. It's just that we have 8 Democrats who are not actually conferencing with Democrats and voting with Democrats. They are conferencing with Republicans. They are voting with Republicans. And they are trading away our protections and our rights to Republicans in New York State who are aligned with Trump's policies and who use the same xenophobic language and language of hate that Trump uses at the national level. And we just can't tolerate it, and we need to actually figure out a way to end it. So if you're interested in that conversation, come to the panel that I'll be moderating with the Working Families Party after this. It's one of my favorite topics. The last piece I want to touch on is the funder strategies. And I just want to give a shout out to all the funders that actually met before this morning. They were here this morning having an early conversation. I listened in on part of it, and I so appreciate the conversation and the push to how can funders actually collaborate better and sort of streamline their processes. And it's awesome that that conversation, I mean, folks have been having it for a while, but it's continuing today. You know, the Ingrid Benedict from the Daphne Foundation was recently speaking at an Advocacy Institute event, and she talked about how funders need to, if they want to fund legislative campaigns, they need to commit to 5 years at a minimum with their grantees, right? Like, enough is enough. If you've got grassroots organizations that are doing good work and you are a funder, just commit to fund them for 5 years no matter what happens, right? Like, we don't win our campaigns in 1 year, we don't win them in 2 years, we often don't win them for 10 years. And we need the support of the philanthropic community to actually get this work done. We also need general operating money. I'm not the first one to come up with that idea. But, you know, and I know the funders in this room don't need to hear this, but I think we all need to do a better job of educating funders who are not in this room around the fact that, like, the shiny new object is not what we need funded. What we need funded What we need funded is the grassroots organizing and the base building and the leadership transition support, right? So I just want to make a plea, I guess, to all of us to do more education with the funders we have relationships with to really move them towards general operating and multi-year support. Because to me, that feels like a key part of actually achieving these electoral and legislative wins. So thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. And I like how you're all plugging your future panels. Thanks for that. Monifa, so close us out, take us home. We've heard a lot about how collaboration is key, transformational solidarity. You've had a lot of experience in leading this work. Talk to us about what lessons both the organizers, our community members, and our funders can learn from coalitions like CPR, Communities United for Police Reform, and how can we use those lessons to build actual sanctuary communities?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I cannot underscore enough the fact that the power to win everything that we're fighting for lies within the people and the communities most impacted. Anything outside of that is like putting your most strongest, most fiercest, most fastest players on the bench until you're in the fourth quarter. And so not only does the power to win lie within the communities most impacted, and we talk about how strategically useful intersectionality is in all of our movements, those leaders in those communities that sit at the most intersections of the issues we're working on are the most powerful in making those ties and in winning our campaigns. So I want to talk briefly, I'm going to tell a story about a woman that sits within many of the intersections that exist in New York City and how powerful she is. Her name is Constance Malcolm. Constance Malcolm is a member of the labor movement. She's a member of 1199. She's a Jamaican immigrant. And she is the mother of Ramali Graham, who 5 years ago was gunned down in his own apartment by the new NYPD. Prior to the election, Constance, her friends, family, activists like the Justice Committee and CPR who work with her, had organized for there to be actions coming up around the anniversary of Ramali's murder. And it just so happened within that time period, what happened with the election happened. And as time approached for this action to highlight what had happened to Ramali Graham, how 5 years had gone by, how this family has received no justice, the big headline was around Muslim ban. The big headlines were coming up around an executive order that was signed. It was literally stopping people were in airplanes coming into the airports around the country and didn't know what their fate was going to be and were humiliated and had their rights stripped from them. And all of this is going on within the same couple of weeks. And Constance, in her mourning, in understanding how important, of course, justice was for Ramali, she continued to push forth with this vigil and to gather a great hundreds of people in Foley Square. It just so happened that on the same day, on the other side of the bridge, in Brooklyn, people were gathering by the thousands in outrage around the Muslim ban. Stores had closed, workers, owners had come out, and it was a huge presence down in Borough Hall, speaking out boldly against what the Trump administration was doing. And it was bitter cold. I have to tell y'all that. It was like 0 degrees outside. So after Constance Malcolm rallied her troops, we'll call us her troops, people spoke out how they supported her. Other mothers who'd also lost their children to the NYPD spoke in solidarity with her call to justice. And it had been out there for hours, and people's hands and feet were numb. Constance takes the microphone and she said, "Yes, I'm the mother of a black boy who was killed by the police, but I am also a Jamaican immigrant." And she said, "And I stand against the Muslim ban, and I stand in solidarity with all immigrants who are having their human rights taken away. And I want us right now to march over the Brooklyn Bridge into Brooklyn and stand with our brothers and sisters who come from Muslim countries." So even on the anniversary of her mourning, she understood that she sits within these intersections. People understand intersectionality, especially if they are not living single-issued lives, as Audre Lorde said. It's a no-brainer. And so this is intersectionality in action, on the ground. Like Fa'ad said, do the communities understand? Did her family members and friends and troops understand why March Over the Bridge? Yes, right? That's the base building, that's the organizing that we need to have invested. We need to make sure that you, as philanthropists, every time you hear about a campaign, every time you hear about a coalition, say, where's your power? Is your power on the bench? Or was it your power that started this campaign? Are they your starters? Are they on the field? Are they making the plays? Are they the captains of this team? And that's the principle that we try to carry through in CPR, and so many other coalitions also around the country are guided by that principle. That you have a legislative strategy, you have a litigation strategy, you make sure that you have a civic engagement strategy, but at the core, you have to have your community organizing, your community empowerment working group driving the lawyers, driving the policy experts, driving the researchers. If they are coming in after the fact, you are quite possibly headed about 100 miles in the wrong direction. And it's not just, it's not just like, you may think it's expedient to fund organizations that have greater infrastructure, that already have a tremendous amount of funding, who can kick back to you things in a timely manner where the metrics jive with how you calculate your metrics inside. But you're really losing time and you're losing money when you do that because they're probably 100 miles in the wrong direction. Take the time, invest in building power, and make sure that those that are most powerful are in that room, not as the bench, as the captains, and we will get through this. We will stop everything that this administration is doing. We will tell the mayor of this city loud and clear that there is no sanctuary city without police accountability. Constance knows that. Biani knows that. So we have to make sure that they are our leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica. Folks, we wanted to be sure to build in time for questions from our audience. We have 2 microphones set up on either aisle. And so if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to line up. And in the interim, let me ask a question of our panelists. So I'm curious about what deliberate spaces that you all are making right now in your current organizing work for white allies or allies in other communities, including any educational projects, messaging, things that you're actively doing. Because I think if you're anything like some of the spaces in which I work, you've been overwhelmed by I have so much energy, I want to help, how can I help? Hi, I'm here. What can folks be learning from the deliberate strategies that you have engaged?
So I'll start. I wanted to, in fact, touch on the women's movement as it relates to this question in Moms Rising. And probably many others in this room played a huge role in the Women's March. And subsequently, there have been a lot of local and state level things going on. Keep marching circles, people having what they're calling daring discussions or challenging conversation circles. Participate in those. Link up with organizations that are having very, very hyper-local. Fahad talked about this. Nothing's happening in Washington, D.C. Like, we need to fix Albany, right? We need to fix what's happening in City Hall. So focus, get with these groups. We have some amazing organizations in CPR. We have Jules for Racial and Economic Justice. Jay Fridge, where's Jay Fridge? Raise your hand. We have Surge, New York. If Surge is in the house, raise your hand. And these and Surge is a network that's national. So get with those organizations, but there's a lot of stuff that has come out of the Women's March that isn't specifically for white allies, but it is a space that makes sure that as white allies come in, there is training, there's discussion, there's conversation that's happening, that pushes people in a way that doesn't just kind of like make them feel good in the short sense, but latches them on to have greater commitment. I think was powerful that Biani had everyone stand up in support of her. But what does that mean? It doesn't just mean to physically stand up and to support her. It means everything that you do moving forward from this moment, making a pledge. So I say definitely link up with those organizations, but you can come and support Make the Road. You can support Drum. You know, all of these organizations where impacted people are at the forefront.
I think that's really the point that I would lift up as well. Is it is very inspiring to see this upsurge of interest and willingness, but we also have to be thoughtful around where that energy is directed and under whose leadership it's directed. You know, the example I raised around the Muslim registry, one of the first responses that came out was, if the registrations happen, I will register as a Muslim, right? Sounds very good. Sounds actually like people are willing to put their bodies on the line. But the fact is, if we waited till the registry was in place, there's already $100 million in motion of jobs, of contracts, of technology, of surveillance that's already in motion. We can't stop it by that time. And so for us, it was important, based out of the experiences of our members that registered the first time, like, no, 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 no. We're not going to wait till it's reactivated. We need to stop it now. And so, you know, that was a big reason why we started that effort immediately after the election. I think we saw a little bit of this dynamic when the Muslim ban was announced, that people were like, okay, we're not going to wait. We're going to show up on the airport within 24 hours, right? We're not going to wait to see where it goes in court. No, we're going to be at the airport, and we're going to be a pain in their butt at the airport. And so I think it's important around, as we engage these folks, I do think locally is the best way to do it, but it really has to be around like orienting people into whose leadership do we take? Who do we learn from? If I'm going to take action on this particular issue, who do I need to hear from? Who's been working on that issue for a decade?
That's right.
Who is the person that bears a primary brunt of that issue? And being able to take leadership from them, and that requires a lot of difficult work. But I think that's what we're trying to do in the hate-free zone, around like sort of doing local people's assemblies, where frontline communities are coming and talking to each other across the languages, but also allies are coming in and figuring out what role do they have to play.
I'll just chime in quickly and say that I think as white allies, we need to be really careful that we're not draining the resources of frontline organizations that need to be organizing communities of color. It's not their job to educate us around our white privilege, and it's not their job to take care of us in our white guilt. And it's our responsibility to go get our own education and to work with other white folks before we go in and making spaces messy with folks of color.
I love that.
And if you're a white person who's been in the movement and you've done your work, doesn't mean that we get to check that box, doesn't mean that we're done doing the work, doesn't mean we don't have to keep doing the work, but it's our responsibility to take the leadership with new white folks who are showing up and to do some work with them. Antonine Pierre works at the Advocacy Institute, and she's also an organizer at the Brooklyn Movement Center. And she's expressed to me how it's been overwhelming, the number of white folks that are showing up at BMC and want BMC to take care of them. And that's not BMC's job, right? So we want to be allies, we want to be on the front lines in the ways that we're called to be, in the ways that we're asked to be, and we want to make sure that it's accountable and responsible.
Thank you. I see we have someone in line for a question. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Berger. I'm an activist and an organizer, and I have a comment more than a question. Opal talked about transformational solidarity, and as I've been attending a lot of these conferences where we're building a movement and building resiliency, I'm questioning the space and how we're using it, because we're really using the space of the oppressors, where there's a panel talking to people. And I think we have to transform how we do these meetings to build community, to build movement, to include people who are not comfortable being talked at and need to be listened to. And with that in mind, I also want to talk about the funding, where donors and funders are traditionally in the thinking mind of charity, and here we're talking about empowerment. And let's be honest, it's going beyond charity if we're really going to do the work of resiliency and transformation to empower people and commit to that empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Great. Well, I know we've already gone over time, and I'm sure everyone's collective stomachs are grumbling. Oh, do we have one more question? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
So I'll just be quick. I want to, and thank you all of the panelists. I want to address this to you, Maggie. You made some interesting comments that really resonated with me, that people in this room need to run for office. While I agree, I can tell you on the record, I'm not the one. I like to stand outside and force those folks to do what they were elected to do. However, I've been spending a lot of time in this very institution with young folks who are studying who are from Barcelona. And I'm fascinated by the rise of Ada Colón, who came from the housing movement PA in Spain. And I guess what I want to ask you is, how do we do it, Maggie? How do we create, because I believe you got to make the political links, although I don't want to go inside that structure. To dismantle it, you have to get somebody inside to see how it was constructed, right? And I think the way we operate now in a two-party system is just not going to take us anywhere, right? You know? And then, so I'll end by saying, I think rather than, and this is a criticism of some folks in this room, you know I love them all, I work with everybody, but a lot of times we think of reforming a system that's broken. How about we think of transforming and creating something new? So I'll stop.
Can I say something quickly about that? I'm so glad you said that, and we didn't get to it, but when we talk about change the police in New York City, and people bring up questions to us about police reform, you know, we're really on a long-term trajectory, imagining safety beyond policing, right? We've got to look at models that actually really make people feel safe. And it's so hard because people, of course, for generations, they've always been police. There was always the precinct at the corner. There's always the squad car. There's always the Hercules Tower, right? And those things don't ever really actually make us feel safe. So we do have to have this vision to think beyond what currently exists. The same thing with the electoral question that came up, you know. Community controlling the police or no police. How about that? Who says that we have to have armed guards for people to behave in a way that is not pathological? We know that that's not the case, right? Some of the safest places on the planet Earth don't have any police. So, no police.
Thanks, Monifa. I don't want to keep everyone from lunch, but Rob, I really appreciate your question. And, you know, I want to fully admit that encouraging folks to run for office is clearly like a shorthand or a perhaps like overused quick cheat to the broader conversation that you're raising. And I think I'm excited to be in that conversation with you and with other folks in this room around what's the role for the Working Families Party, what's the role for the Democratic Socialists, what's the, you know, it is a much bigger conversation and it does require transformation. And I do think we need some folks on the inside to be allies to us as we move this work forward.
If I could add just a little bit on the electoral part. I think it was Opal mentioned in their talk around how do we start to practice democracy? And I think the problem we have around electoral campaigns is like, even if we take like our closest comrades and put them up, what is the infrastructure in place to ensure that they're accountable to the community? We can't just think that we're going to get somebody in office and they're going to save us, right? And so I think, you know, there's lessons from history, you know, I think particularly like Fannie Lou Hamer and the work that was done with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And I think we're now starting to see some examples, particularly with what's been happening in Jackson. And I don't know, Monifa, if you want to speak to it.
Yeah, I was like, I saw that cue coming. So the Malcolm X grassroots movement, for the second time in a row, has run a mayoral candidate in Jackson, Mississippi, right? Which is the belly of white supremacy, you know, a black radical lawyer activist as mayor, and then just win the election. Chokwe Antar beat the incumbent 10-1. Let me say that again, the incumbent 10-1. And that's because of the organizing model of the People's Assemblies going from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood throughout Jackson, Mississippi, and saying basically, I'm not running for mayor, we're running for mayor. When I'm the mayor, we're the mayor. And just really bringing people into a sense of democracy, you know, because I think that's why some people step back from running for office, because they're like, because there's no democracy, right? Opal said it, there's no shortcut. Me just stepping into the office is not gonna make it so. So it has to build from the ground up, even locally.
Thank you. I'm so sorry that we've run out of time for more questions. As we close, I want to go back to the earlier comment about really transforming even the spaces in which we have these dialogues. You know, there's so many elephants in the room today, right? I mean, we are funders and donors and organizers and members, and we're having yet another conversation about post-Trump, and we're doing it in a way where we're live streaming, we're branding, we are forcing ourselves to perpetuate these models of business and these models of what we believe are accountability when we have such an incredible and creative vision for us here in this room. So I'm hoping that as you break out into your breakout sessions, as you have informal conversations over lunch today, that you participate in not only learnings, but in thinking new ideas, and that you take those ideas and you report them back to all of us. So as we transition out of this room, so folks know, we will have lunch downstairs, so please exit as you came. Our breakout sessions will be beginning probably just a few minutes late, but if you could assemble as quickly as possible with your lunches in the rooms of the sessions where you intend to participate. And then we will see you all back here at 3:45 for performance and closing panel. But before you all start rustling, I want to take a moment so that we can all thank so much our incredible morning speakers. Thank you all.